Greetings, my name is Jalondra Davis. I work as an assistant professor of English at the University of California, Riverside. I'm in my second year. One of the reasons I say I work as an assistant professor rather than I am is because I think it's really important to separate our institutional identities from our personal identities. So I'm a Black feminist artist intellectual, and I work as an educator. In my current project, I'm looking at African diasporic mermaid lore. So some of the things we were asked to respond to, what do we think about like the landscape for speculative fiction studies and doing speculative fiction studies within universities? For me, that really hasn't been a difficult thing because I'm at UC Riverside. We have a designated emphasis in science fiction and fantasy. We have the largest archive, the Eden collection of science and fiction and fantasy. We have a minor, we have several courses around the topic. So yeah, I don't really find issues with being taken seriously as a speculative fiction scholar. I think one of the things that's happening though with me working on this mermaids project is that I am starting to get the sense that for people who aren't interested in mermaids, which who could not be interested in mermaids? I don't know. But for people who aren't necessarily interested in that, like students taking my classes or other faculty, I have to work a little harder to articulate to them the value of my work. And I think that that can be similar for other scholars of speculative fiction and fantasy studies. So I do think it's important that we learn how to talk about our research in a way that places it in the larger context in terms of how the things that we research are relevant to other fields that are not in speculative fiction. I do sometimes feel like we get a bit siloed, and like because a lot of us are sci-fi fantasy nerds, we might be, very, very, very interested in, like the racial dimensions of the vampire, but we also need to be able to speak to how does the racial dimensions of the vampire speak to larger conversations that are happening in other fields in the humanities around the human and what it means to be human, for example. So in my project, I'm looking at mermaid stories, Black mermaid stories that are specifically taking up history and pursuing questions about Western modernity, race, and the Anthropocene and the sort of relationship between race as like a historical fantasy, right? So that's the kind of articulation I find myself having to do in order to speak to people who aren't just interested in mermaids for mermaids' sake. And I think that's a similar task a lot of us have as, science fiction scholars. Um, Collaborating across fields, including fields that are not just within speculative fiction. I am, because I'm looking at mermaids, right? I'm in a conversation with a lot of folks, and I'm building on the work of a lot of folks who are just working on water and the relationship between Blackness and water. So people, like Kevin Dawson, I'm really using his work a lot, who looks at real life, like Black aquatic histories, and historians who are looking at water and segregation, people who are looking at aquatic recreation, people who are looking at doing water-based archaeology, right? So I'm in conversation with these scholars, and I am working on creating, in the very beginning stages of two different working groups, both looking at the relationship between Blackness and water. So I'll be more on the fantasy side as a person in these working groups, but my work is also speaking to Black aquatics more broadly and Black aquatic history and recreation and all of those things. Um, I have what I would say is a non-traditional background. I didn't go straight into a PhD program. I worked in nonprofit arts organizations for several years. I got an MFA in creative writing. I adjuncted at a lot of places in both creative writing as well as interdisciplinary studies. And so I really, really put, rather than seeing like not being a pipeline scholar or a non-traditional scholar as a weakness, I've really used it as a strength in my department in order to speak to the perspective of diverse first generation students as much as possible, as well as designing curriculum that is responsive to some of the things our students are asking for, such as more career focused type of instruction and opportunities. So I created my department's first public humanities course. And I also had guest speakers come into that course and created sort of like a lecture series. And yeah, one of the things I try to do is kill as many birds with one stone as possible. So I created this course as part of our department's curriculum review. So this is now something that is institutionalized in our department. And I also am teaching the course, and I also did this lecture series. So I've been able to do service that is really just kind of replicating the things I'm already doing in my teaching and interested in doing in my teaching, as well as things that are institutionalized, so are able to be recognized. Like, no one's going to forget that I created this public humanities class that the students are really grateful for, because it's connected them with some different kinds of opportunities of things they can do in their English major, right? So I think the fact that I've worked outside of academia and that I have these relationships with community organizations and knowledge of how to do different kinds of writing and do PR and stuff like that, I've really, I think, made it work to my benefit. Publishing, I just want to say a little bit about publishing. One of the strategies that I used in order to publish more peer-reviewed journal articles was to go after special issues both within speculative fiction as well as in relevant fields where they might not have as many pieces to the particular thing I was writing about. For example, I published an article on Black mermaids in a special issue of Shima, which is an archipelagic cultural journal. So the thing that I think is cool about special issues is you can often get in on the basis of the abstract. Not so much anymore. I'm starting to see a lot of issues starting to ask for the full piece, but there are still special issues that people will accept based on your abstract, your proposal for what the article is going to be. And then I find that the peer review process will it will feel much more like mentoring than just getting screened out and rejected, right? Because if the piece has already been accepted, then the peer reviewers are reading it with the perspective of improving it, right? So that it can be published in the issue, right? Rather than just, throwing it out. So I found that this strategy was able to, also the timeline for special issues can be a little bit more quicker. So I know you can't publish everything in a special issue, and there are some departments that might have feelings about, invited versus, submitting through the regular process. But I haven't experienced any difference in how those publications are viewed in my department. And I think it was a really great way for me to like get some momentum in terms of publishing. Yeah, so those are some tips that I have. Make your non-traditional background work for you. Kill as many birds with one stone as that's such a violent metaphor, but like try to overlap your efforts. Like, how can you overlap your service and your teaching? How can you overlap your research and your teaching? One of the strategies I use to get writing done during teaching quarters is to write along with the students. I like to do process writing with my students where they're moving through proposal, research notes, outlines, drafts, and I will pick something I'm working on and I will do this process along with students because it gives me an external deadline to keep working on my own work, and it also gives them examples for what I'm asking for at each step of the process. So overlapping your responsibilities as much as possible, and building community, build community, build community, build community. I say build community instead of networking. Reach out to people, make friends. If someone says something great in the chat while you're at a virtual conference, reach out to them. If someone's working on something similar to you, don't get all anxious about it. Reach out to them. And it could be scary, and some of us are like introverted, or we're worried about relationships feeling transactional. Like, what can I give back to these people if they help me? And I just really encourage you not to worry about that. The worst thing that could happen is they can like never answer, they could ghost you. And what has that really done at the end of the day? When on the other side of it, you can make some good friends. And through having that community, you get a lot of the hidden curriculum that if you're a first generation scholar, there's a lot of just like information and little tidbits that you're more likely to miss if you don't have some folks that you're working alongside. I hope this has been helpful. Thank you.